Hey, Walter Sorrells back with another Knife Making Friday 5. Today we're going to talk about sharpening, specifically honing versus stropping, or buffing, or polishing, or... So I've been thinking about sharpening a lot lately because as I'm moving from doing fairly high-end custom work where sharpening is just a very, very small part of the job and not something that I worry about how much time it takes, to production where every second matters, I'm looking for ways to bring a razor sharp knife to the marketplace, but to do it in a reasonably quick way. So I've been kind of rethinking a lot of my processes, and as a result, thinking about how the whole sharpening thing works. Now, look, if you want to just get something pretty sharp enough for 99% of the things that you do out there, you can spend about, 30 seconds on the grinder and get a knife pretty darn sharp. But classically, sharpening kind of has two phases. If you really want a shaving sharp knife, if you want that hair popping sharpness, there are two stages to sharpening. One is honing, and the second is typically described as stropping, but sometimes it's done mechanically. Now here's where the terminology gets a little tricky. The first stage of sharpening a knife is always going to be done with some kind of reasonably coarse abrasive. But once the blade has reached a fairly high level of sharpness, if you really want to get it sharp, you go through a second stage, which traditionally was stropping, where you took a piece of leather, something like this, and you swipe the blade back and forth on the strop. But there are mechanical ways of doing that too, and those are sometimes referred to as polishing, sometimes as buffing, and sometimes confusingly even as honing. So here's the basic point. Regardless of what you call it, there are two phases to that polishing process. So let's take this little tiny knife right here. The first stage is going to rub the knife blade toward an abrasive surface. So we'll take this bench grinder stone as an example. As this rotates toward the knife, the blade is up. And that abrasive process will raise, when you do it properly, a wire edge, a little tiny thin area on the edge where the steel sort of sticks up. And you have to get rid of that to make it to the finest level. So that's where stropping comes in, or buffing, or polishing, or whatever you want to call it. And in that process, you move in the opposite direction so that the blade edge moves away from the stroke. So I think most people understand that basic sharpening process pretty well, whether they can execute it well or not. But the stropping, buffing, polishing stage, whatever you want to call it, a lot of people don't really understand all that well. It's not actually all that complicated, but here's what's happening. You have that little wire edge that you've raised, and you have little abrasive, little grooves in the steel that have been formed, sort of micro serrations in the steel that are formed by the abrasives that you've been using to hone that edge. But once you go to the final stage, you're actually polishing the steel, you're smoothing it out so that those micro serrations more or less go away, and that wire edge is removed, bringing the steel to a really nice sharp point. And that's what allows you to have that edge that you can shave with and that's super, super sharp. So my philosophy about sharpening is that, pretty decent sharpness is fine for 99% of the things that you do. A lot of people stress about sharpness. You get on YouTube and there are these guys shaving and all that sort of thing. It's cool to have a knife that's that sharp, and sometimes I carry a knife that's that sharp, but sometimes I don't, and I don't go around feeling bad about it. Anyway, if you really want to get buck wild and get super, super sharp, sharpening and honing are not that hard. So a couple keys to sharpening. The first being routine maintenance makes a big difference. A lot of times what happens is people let their knives go for a long time and it ends up being this kind of butter knife, and then when they go back to try and sharpen it on a by hand on a on an Arkansas stone or something like that, it's not super aggressive to begin with. It just takes them ages and ages. They never get anywhere. They get frustrated. So if you keep sharpening, you can spend 2 or 3 minutes on a regular basis, once a month, once every couple months, and you don't have to do so much work that you get frustrated with it. Second point, having a consistent edge angle is really important. If you can't do that by hand, there are lots of little jigs and other types of products out there that will help you maintain a consistent angle. What is that angle? It really depends. You can read all kinds of different opinions on that. The most important thing is just that whatever angle you choose, you execute it consistently. So third point, and this is kind of the general point about what that edge angle might be, is the thinner that edge angle is, in other words, the longer that little secondary bevel is on your knife, the sharper it's going to be and the better it will cut. Now it's also a little more fragile, so just bear that in mind. So fourth point, like I've been saying, if you really want crazy sharpness, you have to sharpen or hone the knife with a standard abrasive, and then you have to go to a strop, a buff, a polisher, something that is going to polish that edge by going in an opposite direction, removing the wire edge, and then smoothing out that the entire sort of micro bevel there where your edge is established. Stropping is kind of the typical way to get there. A lot of people are, think it's super tricky or something. It's not. It can be done quite easily. So I'm going to do a separate video where I kind of show some of these processes. Look for that in the next couple of weeks. Another one I'm going to be doing, I'm going to actually make a strop. Very simple project. Anybody can do it at home in an afternoon, and it'll really kind of step up your game in terms of sharpening. Along those same lines, I'm going to make a wheel for, it's sort of a terminology issue. Is it buffing? Is it polishing? Is it mechanical stropping? Whatever you want to call it. But I'm going to make a wheel that will perform that same process as the strop, but way faster. Okay, so one last set of videos coming up soon, and this has nothing to do with sharpening or anything, but I'm going to be doing a series of videos about making throwing knives. If you've been watching my videos for a while, you know that I love doing projects where I show that there are many ways up the mountain, different ways of skinning the cat, whatever metaphor you want. So I'm going to do one knife that will be made using kind of conventional knife making methods with a belt grinder and so forth. I'm going to do one that uses a bench grinder, which is a much simpler tool, and maybe an angle grinder too. So for guys that are using a little bit, have a little bit less elaborately equipped shops, that'll give them an in on this project. And then third, I'll do one on my CNC machine. So 3 different ways of doing it. All the knives will come out looking exactly the same level of quality. They'll all work exactly the same, but totally different ways of making them. So sharpening, easier than you think. Look for more information in upcoming videos. See you next Friday. Thanks for watching, guys. If you feel like you got something out of this video, don't forget to subscribe. Also, click on the link to Patreon for a great way to give back to the channel. Plus, check me out on Instagram, Facebook, Twitter. Links in the description. If you want something sharp and pointy, maybe a gift for yourself or one of the cooler people in your life, check out my Tactics Armory website and pick up one of our tactical or outdoor knives. And finally, if you want to learn to make hamones or Japanese swords, check out WalterSorrellsBlades.com, where you can find videos about how I make hamones, as well as forging, mounting, polishing, and fittings for Japanese swords. Thanks, and see you soon.